Hey there, Christophe from the French Herbal. If you have ever tasted very strong black tea or a young red wine or unripe fruit, like persimmon for instance, and you felt your mouth suddenly go dry and rough, you have experienced tannins. I wanted to do a video on tannins because way back when I studied plants, I was taught a few things that were incorrect based on what we know today. I mean, no blame on my teachers, they were great herbalists, but back then we used to say things that sounded very categorical. Like big tannin molecules do not penetrate in circulation and small ones do. Well, not exactly. Tannins are very useful plant constituents. We use them all the time. They play a big defensive role for the plant and they play a big role in our natural pharmacy. So if you stay with me in this episode, I'd like to take you through what I learned about tannins those last few years. Things that are a lot more nuanced. Okay, sounds good? So let's get started. So first of all, why do plants produce tannins? Is it to please us and help us with our medical conditions? Well, certainly not. They make those compounds as a defense mechanism. As we will see later, tannins bind to proteins. Proteins found in food, proteins found in our own mucus, and they will precipitate those proteins. So they can interfere with the digestion of herbivores. And plants don't like herbivores, right? And it will be the same effect in omnivores like us. So we'll have to come back to that point in a few minutes. So anyway, when animals eat tannin-rich leaves or barks, the tannins will bind to digestive enzymes or dietary proteins, making the food much harder to digest. So this reduces the nutritional value of the food and will discourage the herbivore to eat that plant. So animals will go eat something else. In other words, tannins act as anti-nutrients in a lot of non-adapted mammals. Now, some species, for example, goats and deer, they are adapted. They produce special proteins in their saliva that bind tannins before they reach the gut, reducing their anti-nutrient effect. You will find lots of tannins in unripe fruits as well, because the plant needs to protect it at this stage. The seeds are not mature yet. And as the fruit matures, tannin levels will usually decrease, making the fruit more palatable and encouraging the animal to disperse the seeds. Pretty clever, right? There's a famous study done in the 1980s on African acacias. The study has been kind of debunked, but still, I love that story. When giraffes start to eat the leaves of one acacia plant, it will pump tannins into the leaves within 5 to 10 minutes. The damaged leaves will also release a gas that acts as an alarm signal to all the acacias nearby. And they will all pump tannins into their leaves, up to like 200 to 400% more as a protection. That's just fascinating how plants communicate. Tannins can also inhibit the growth of certain bacteria and fungi. So they protect the plants against pathogen. And some animals will take advantage of that. For instance, I had a discussion a while back with a herbal practitioner who specializes in herd animals. And he told me that the diversity of plants on the grazing field is directly linked to the ability of the animal to maintain a good health status. Logical, right? The more diverse the food is, the better. And animals like goats will graze on barks rich in tannins to fend off certain infections. They know their plants and they know when to reach for tannins, even though it is also an anti-nutrient. And these days, when farmers remove all the trees and bushes in their fields, you can guess what happens. So, in summary, tannins protect the plants against bacterial and fungal infection, but also they protect themselves against herbivores by acting as an anti-nutrient. So what are tannins exactly? Well, they're a group of plant constituents very common in the plant kingdom, belonging to the large family of polyphenols. and their main characteristic is their ability to bind to proteins. They attach themselves to proteins and form complexes that become insoluble in fluids and precipitate. They have a particular affinity for proline, an amino acid found in our saliva. And not just proline. Tannins will also interact with other salivary components like mucins. And in the past, we thought this binding would precipitate the protein, thus explaining the mouth puckering effect, right? You can imagine a layer of precipitate that coats the inside of your mouth and gums and gives it a dry and rough texture. But there's another hypothesis being explored today, saying that tannins modify the lubricating properties of saliva without precipitation. That's still an active area of research. In any case, the feeling is that there's no more lubrication and that there's a tightening of the tissues, and that feeling is what we call astringency. Astringency is not a taste. Instead, it's a tactile sensation. It's a feeling perceived in the mouth. And a quick reminder here, bitterness found in gentian, for instance, and sourness found in lemon, for instance, are not astringency. Astringency is a different feeling. Do not confuse those three. Anyway, so this feeling will go away after a while, but it gives you a feel for what will happen further down in your digestive tract. What happens in your mouth will also happen to some extent lower down in your gut. And I say to some extent because the effect will change due to variations of pH, due to the action of digestive enzymes, and with the gut flora that will transform tannins, as we will see in a minute. But there will be some astringency lower down as well. And tannins not only react with the proteins in our mucus and secretions, they also react with the proteins in our own flesh, in our own tissues. And you see the name tannin comes from the historical process of tanning leather to stabilize animal skins. Tannins bind strongly to collagen, the main protein in our own tissues. And if you understand those 2 points, you understand a big part of their medicinal properties. So one more time, they bind to proteins found in our fluids and secretions, and they either precipitate them or change the viscosity in other ways still being explored. And number 2, they bind to the actual tissues, right? They seal the tissues, they plug leaks, if you will. They tighten things up when they're a little too loose. The binding is done mainly through the OH group of the tannin molecule, what we call the hydroxyl group. This OH group binds to the part of the protein that contains the nitrogen element. I will put a few pictures of tannins on my website so you can see all of those OH groups. Ellagic acid, which is a tannin, has 4 OH groups, but enothin B, which is another tannin, has more than 20. And in my mind, I imagine like an octopus. That's my tannin molecule. And each tentacle is a hydroxyl, an OH group. And it will grab the protein in mucus and in the tissues it is in contact with. And as you can imagine, the more tentacle a tannin has, the more binding it will achieve. That is why large tannin molecules with lots of hydroxyl groups will be more astringent. There's more to this though, right? Sorry, but when we try to simplify nature, we take shortcuts, which means it can be a bit oversimplistic. For tannins, there's also a matter of the flexibility of the molecule and the type of bonds it has that will make an influence on this astringency. But hey, let's relax a bit. We don't need to geek out too much on the flexibility and the number of OH groups to understand tannins and the astringency of plants, which I've kind of been doing now for a few minutes, I realize. But so there's a much simpler way. Just feel it in your mouth. The more mouth puckering you feel, the more astringent it is. And again, go find that unripe persimmon and drop me a comment to tell me what you feel. That being said, if you're curious and you want to understand a bit of the plant chemistry, then look up the major tannins and see how big that octopus is and how many tentacles it has. All right, Here's another important fact. Tannins are primarily divided into two families, hydrolyzable and condensed tannins. Other types exist, such as fluorotannins in brown algae, but let's keep it simple and talk about those two largest groups. The first group is called hydrolyzable tannins. And these tannin molecules are big, and they're built around a central sugar molecule, which is usually glucose, to which several phenolic acids are attached. And when they're hydrolyzed by our digestive tract, in other words, when the bonds between glucose and phenolic acids are broken, they release smaller molecules. And here are two very well-known hydrolyzable tannins in plants. Gallotannins, which release gallic acid when they're hydrolyzed. Gallotannins are big. Gallic acid is much smaller in size. And then we have elagitannins, which release elagic acid when they're hydrolyzed. And same here, elagitannins are big, and elagic acid being released is much smaller. Hydrolyzable tannins are found in plants such as oak, witch hazel, pomegranate, great burnet, etc. The second group is called condensed tannins, also known as proanthocyanidins or PACs. And these compounds are made of chains of flavonoid units. And unlike hydrolyzable tannins, they're more resistant to degradation, and they cannot be easily broken down by hydrolysis in our digestive tract. Condensed tannins are very widespread in the plant kingdom. They occur in grapeseed, cacao, many tree barks including cinnamon, hawthorn, tea, cranberry, and many other plants. Which brings us to the medicinal properties of tannins. Finally, yeah. When tannins come into contact with tissues or mucous membrane, they will reduce irritation when used in moderate amounts. Please note that too much astringency will end up irritating mucous membranes by suppressing its protective layer, right? The opposite effect. They will decrease secretions, which can be useful when they're excessive, decrease microbleeding, which can also be useful, and limit bacterial growth. Because of this effect, tannin-rich plants have traditionally been used to support diarrhea, for instance with a simple cup of black tea, which is quite astringent, inflammation of the mouth, throat, or intestinal tract, for instance with blackberry leaves, venous insufficiency, for instance with the red vine leaf, we have an episode on that, vaginal or other type of fluid discharge, for instance with lady's menthol leaves. And yes, if you think that lady's menthol is a lot more than just tannins, you're correct, but let's keep that for another episode. And excessive bleeding, whether from menstrual flow or fibroids or any other type of situation, for instance with raspberry leaves. And please note that these are medical conditions calling for a physician. In certain cases, like inflammation of the mouth or diarrhea, the beneficial effects are mainly local, meaning that they occur directly where the tannins are applied to the tissues. But some tannins can also be metabolized by our gut, as we said, and penetrate circulation. In other words, they can be absorbed by the intestinal tract. And if the metabolites can penetrate circulation, they will also be beneficial on certain tissues like arteries and veins, which explain the effect on bleeding, on venous insufficiencies, on vaginal discharges, etc. Again, they tonify tissues from the inside and they slow down leakage. A quick pause to let you know that you can grab my free ebook on preparing herbal teas for the 4 seasons. It's full of simple recipes and blends you can make with herbs you can buy or even grow almost anywhere. The link is right below this episode. I hope you enjoy it. So then, what type of tannins will lead to absorption in the gut and have a systemic effect and be beneficial on the vascular system? Well, large tannin molecules, if they remain whole, have limited absorption in the intestinal tract. They're just too big. And I was taught that hydrolyzable tannins, say from oak bark, because they're so big, do not penetrate the blood. However, several processes take place during digestion. Hydrolyzable tannins will break down into smaller molecule. We talked about that, gallic and ellagic acid. Gallic acid can be directly absorbed by the gut and have a systemic effect. And ellagic acid, on the other hand, is weakly absorbed. However, the gut bacteria can transform ellagic acid into a molecule called urolithins, which have been detected in human blood after consumption of certain food like pomegranate. Amazing, right? When the gut cannot do the job, the microbiome will provide a little help. Condensed tannins, the other big group, the proanthocyanidins, are also metabolized by gut bacteria into smaller compounds, which I'm unable to pronounce, like phenol gamma valero something, which will contribute to the systemic effect of those condensed tannins for vascular health. Therefore, while many tannins act locally in the digestive tract, some of their metabolites will also produce a systemic effect. I insist on this point because to this date some people keep repeating the fact that tannins are too big to be absorbed, which is simply not true. And actually, it seems that any type of tannins will be broken down into smaller stuff and will go inside to some extent. Sure, some more than others. Proanthocyanidins are known for their beneficial effects on the vascular system, for instance, but do not underestimate other plants rich in tannins and hydrolyzable tannins for some kind of systemic effect. It will do that. Here's an important point, at least to me as a practitioner. The more tannin a plant contains, the less subtle its effect will be. At one extreme, you could use oak galls, which contain more than 50% tannins in dry weight. And by the way, oak galls were given internally in the past, but not anymore. They're just way too high in tannins, and there's toxicity associated. Many plants are very tannic, like herb Robert, which is a type of geranium, witch hazel, oak bark, pomegranate peel, etc. These plants would be useful for tissues that are very flaccid and so red and inflamed that they lost their integrity, their structure. Those tissues are red and puffy and leaky and with microbleeding. So very, very inflamed. On the other hand, if you had a small to moderate inflammation, be it in the mouth and throat or intestinal tract, a mildly astringent plant will be much better suited for the situation, much more elegant. Or maybe mixing the astringent plant with some aromatics or something else, depending on the objective. Sometimes, also, a mucosal inflammation will respond much better to soothing mucilages rather than the astringency of tannins. So basically, the more a tissue is inflamed and has lost its integrity with lots of leakage, the more astringency you would look for. But in other cases, go easy with tannins. All right, let's finish with some safety consideration. Although tannins are natural compounds very present in foods and plants, excessive consumption can have some drawbacks. The first one is that they will interfere with nutrient absorption, with supplements, with drug absorption. Tannins can reduce absorption of minerals like iron, so careful if you have anemia and iron deficiency. And they interact strongly with alkaloid type drugs like quinine, ephedrine, etc. Although they could also interact with other type of medication. So separate tannin-rich preparation from meals, from supplements, from medication by at least 2 hours. With tannins, more is not better. At some point, the person will get nauseated and will have some gut discomfort if the preparation is too tannic. Again, a little tannin combined with other plants can go a long way, unless the situation calls for a strongly tannic preparation, which would then usually be given in the short term. And by the way, if you're an herbalist, you might be wondering, did he forget to mention that thing with alkaloids? The thing where if you mix tannins with alkaloids, a big sludge will appear at the bottom of the jar, or not? Is that exaggerated? Well, this will be the subject of my next episode, which will be fairly short, but I will shed some light on that phenomenon. Well, that's it, folks. I hope you found those explanations useful for your herbal practice. Thanks for being here. I will see you very soon for the next episode of The French Herbal.